Welcome to Audiobook 365 Stories.
Time, which Lord Leicester had been wasting in wild living, passed very quietly in the Thames Valley, under the white walls of Winwood Hall. During the months since the sad goodbye between the two lovers, life went on at the cottage just as before, with one big change. Jasper Adelstone now visited almost every day, and Stella was engaged to him. That was the only difference, but it was a big difference. Lord Leicester was gone, her true, first love, the man who had won her young heart, and in his place was this man whom she hated. But she tried hard. She had made a promise. She had given herself for the two people she loved, had given herself completely, and she tried to keep her promise. She looked a little pale, a little more serious than before, but she did not complain. If she did not laugh the happy, carefree laugh that her uncle used to say was like the sound of sunlight, she smiled sometimes. And if the smile was a little sad, it was still very sweet. The old man noticed nothing wrong. He thought she had just become quieter and thought it was because of her engagement. He kept on painting, busy with his work, hardly noticing the world around him, and he was quite content. Jasper's quiet, low voice did not bother him, and he would keep painting while they talked nearby, not paying attention to them. Since the last blow of his son's crime, he lived more completely in his art than ever. Of the two, Frank and Stella, maybe Frank was the most changed. He had grown thinner and paler, and looked more delicate and fragile. It had been planned that he would go to the university next term, but Mr. Hamilton, the old doctor, who had been called to check on a slight cough the boy had hesitated and advised that university should be postponed for now. Was he ill? Stella had asked, very worried, because, like a woman, she had grown to love the boy she had sacrificed herself for with a strong love. Not ill, the old doctor had said. Certainly not ill, and he went on to explain that Frank was delicate, that all boys with fair hair and light skin were more or less delicate. But he is such a beautiful color, said Stella nervously. Why, yes, a nice color, said the old man, and that was all she could get out of him. But the cough did not go away, and as the autumn fogs came up from the river and covered the meadows with a thin, beautiful mist, the cough got worse, but the beautiful color did not go away either, so Stella was not very worried. As for Frank, he did not care much about his sickness. "Do I take any medicine?" he said, when Stella asked. "Yes, I take all the medicine the old man, the doctor, sends. It isn't very bad, and even though it doesn't help me much, it seems to make you and the old man happy, so we are all happy." "You don't seem to care about things, Frank," said Stella one morning. She had come into the garden to look at the trees by the river, which were turning gold, brown, and yellow, and found him leaning on the gate, with his hands clasped and his eyes fixed on the hall, just like the first time she saw him when he came home. He looked at her and smiled faintly. "Why don't you go and try fishing?" she said. Or go for a ride? You only walk around the gardens or in the meadows." He looked at her curiously. "Why don't you?" he said slowly, his big blue eyes looking at her face, which turned red under his gaze. You don't seem to care about things, Stell. You don't go and fish or take a ride or anything. You only walk around the garden or in the meadows. Her long lashes brushed her cheeks, and she struggled not to sigh. His words had hit her hard. But, she said hesitantly, I am not a boy. Girls should stay at home and do their duties, and walk and move as if they were in a dream, as if their hearts and souls were far away, he said, waving his thin white hand in the air slowly. Her lips trembled, and she turned her face away, but only for a moment. She turned back to him with a smile. You're a silly, dreamy boy, she said, putting her hand on his shoulder and gently touching his cheek. Maybe so, he said. My dreams are more than all the world to me, says the poet, you know, he added sadly. Stella's heart hurt. Are you angry with me, Frank? She said. Please don't be. He shook his head. No, not angry, he said, looking out at the rising mist. She held back a sigh. She understood his silent blame. Every moment of the day, he silently accused her of betraying Lord Leicester. If only he knew why she had done it, but he would never know. You're a dreamy boy, she said, trying to sound cheerful. What are you thinking about now, I wonder? I was wondering too, he answered, without looking at her. I was wondering, shall I tell you? She answered, yes, with her hand on his cheek. I was wondering where Lord Leicester was and how. Her hand fell to her side and pressed against her heart. Hearing the name suddenly felt like a blow. He glanced around. I beg your pardon, he said. I forgot. We shouldn't mention his name, should we? I will not say it again. But I can't stop my thoughts, Stell. No, she whispered, almost too softly to hear. Thoughts are free, he said, but mine are not. They are always thinking of him, the best and noblest of men, the man who saved my life. Even though I may not speak of him, it would be ungrateful to forget him. Frank. At her sad and almost begging tone, he turned and put his hand on her arm. Forgive me, Stell. I didn't mean to hurt you, but, well, it's so hard to understand, so hard to bear. To feel, to know that he is far away and suffering, while that man, Jasper Adelstone, I beg your pardon, Stell. I will say no more. Do not, she whispered, her face white and strained, but calm, do not. Besides, you are wrong. He has forgotten by this time. He turned and looked at her with sudden anger. Then he smiled as her beautiful face made him soften. You are wrong about him and yourself. No, Stell, men do not forget a girl like you. No more, she said, almost like a command. He shook his head, and then the cough came and made him stop talking. She put her arm around his neck. That cough, she said. You must go inside, dear. Look at the mist. Come in. He turned silently and walked beside her for a few steps. Then he said with a trembling voice, Stella, let me ask one question, and then I will be silent forever. Well, she said, have you heard from him? Do you know where he is? She paused a moment to control her voice, then she said, I have heard nothing. I do not know if he is alive or dead. He sighed and his head dropped. Let's go in, he said. Then he started, for he heard a familiar footstep. There is Jasper, he said, with a pause before the name, and he took his arm away and walked away from her. Stella turned with a strange, fixed smile on her face, the smile she had learned to greet him with. Jasper came up the path with his quick and quiet steps, his hand outstretched. He would have taken her in his arms and kissed her if he had dared. But he could not. With all his determination, he dared not. There was something about her, some mysterious aura that kept him almost at arm's length. It was as if she had surrounded herself with a magic circle that he could not cross. He took her hand and kissed it, his eyes drinking in her beauty with a thirsty longing. "My darling," he murmured in his soft, low voice, out so late. "Won't you catch cold?" "No," she said, and like her smile, her voice seemed fixed and practiced. "I will not catch cold, I never do. But I just sent Frank inside. He has been coughing terribly. He does not seem strong at all." Jasper frowned with quick impatience. "Frank is fine," he said, with a touch of jealousy in his voice. "Are you not worrying too much about the boy? You worry without reason." "Alarm myself," she repeated, ready to be alarmed at the suggestion. I hope I am not alarmed." "Why should I be?" she said, anxiously. The jealousy grew more obvious. "There is no reason at all," he said, shortly. "The boy is fine. He just got his feet wet and caught a cold, that's all." Stella smiled. "Yes, that is all," she said, "of course. But it is strange Dr. Hamilton can't get rid of it for him." "Maybe he doesn't follow the doctor's advice," he replied. "Boys are always careless about themselves." "But don't let Frank take up all the conversation," he said. "Let's talk about us," and he kissed her hand again. "Yes," said Stella obediently. He kept her hand in his and pressed it. "I have come to talk to you tonight, Stella, about us, my dear. I want you to be very kind to me." She looked forward at the lighted room with the same fixed expression, waiting patiently, obediently, for him to continue. There was no response in her touch or on her face. He noticed it. He always noticed it, and it made him angry. He clenched his teeth hard. "Stella, I have been waiting month after month to say what I am going to say now, but I couldn't wait any longer, my dear, my own. I want the wedding to happen." She did not react much, but she turned and looked at him, and her face looked pale in the darkness, and he felt a faint shudder in the hand he was holding. "Will you not speak?" he said, after a moment, almost angry because of the strong feelings inside him. "Have you nothing to say, or will you say no?" "I almost expect it." "I will not say no," she said, at last, and her voice was cold and strained. "You have the right I gave you, to ask for the fulfillment of our agreement." "Heaven help me," he broke in, passionately. "Why do you talk like this? Will I never win you to love me? Will you never forget how we came together?" "Do not ask me," she said, almost pleading, and her face quivered. "Really, I try hard to forget the past and to please you." It was sad to hear and see her, and his heart ached, but it was for himself as well as for her. "Do you doubt my love?" he said hoarsely. Do you think any man could love you better than I do? Does that mean nothing to you? Yes, yes, she said, slowly, sadly. It does mean something. I. Then she looked down. Why do you talk about love between us? She said. Ask me, tell me to do anything, and I will do it, but do not talk about love. He bit his lip. Well, he said, with effort, I will not. I see I cannot touch your heart yet, but the time will come. You cannot resist a love like mine. And will you let our marriage be soon? Yes, she said simply. He raised her hand to his lips and kissed it hungrily, and she forced back the shiver that threatened to overtake her. By soon, he murmured, as they walked toward the house, I mean very soon, before the winter. Stella did not speak. Let it be next month, my dear, he murmured. I will not feel sure of you until you are truly mine. Once you are mine beyond doubt, I will teach you to love me. Stella looked at him, and a strange, sad smile, more bitter than tears, appeared on her pale lips. Teach her to love him, as if love could be taught. I am not afraid, he said, responding to her smile. No one could resist it, not even you, though your heart were made of stone. It is not that, she said, in a low voice, thinking of the dull ache that filled her heart day and night. They went into the house. Mr. Etheridge was wandering around the room, smoking his pipe, his head down, deep in thought, as usual. Frank was lying back in the old armchair. He looked tired and delicate, but the beautiful color shone in his face. He looked up and nodded as Jasper entered, but Jasper was not happy with just a nod, so he went over to him and laid a hand on his shoulder. The boy winced and shrank faintly. He never liked Jasper to touch him and always resented it. Well, Frank, he said, with his faint smile, how's the cold tonight? Frank mumbled something indistinctly and shifted in his seat. Not so well, eh? Said Jasper. It seems to me that a change would do good. What do you say to going away for a little while? The boy looked up at Stella with a worried look. Leave Stella. I don't want to go away, he said shortly. I am fine. I hate changes. Stella came up to his chair and knelt beside him. It would be good for you, dear, she said in her soft, musical voice. He bent close to her. Do you mean alone? He asked. I don't want to go alone. I won't go alone. No, not alone, of course, said Jasper, smiling. I think someone else needs a change too. And he looked at Stella kindly. I'll go if Stella goes, said Frank firmly. What do you say, sir? Asked Jasper to the old man. He stared, and the idea had to be explained to him. He had not heard what was said. Go away. Yes, if you like. But why? Frank's cold? I don't think any other place is better for a cold, is it? It is? Very well then. You don't want me to come, I suppose? Well, said Jasper. I couldn't do it, exclaimed the old man, almost in fear. I would be like a fish out of water. I can't paint away from the river and the meadows. Oh, it's impossible. Besides, you don't want an old man tagging along, and he looked at Stella and smiled grimly. I couldn't go without you, said Stella quietly. Nonsense, he said. Take the other old woman, Mrs. Penfold. She can go. It will be good for her, even though she doesn't have a cold. Then he stopped in front of the boy and looked at him with a sad, thoughtful expression. Yes, he said in a low voice, he needs a change. I haven't noticed. He looks thin and unwell. Yes, you should go. Where will you go? Stella shook her head with a smile, but Jasper was ready. Let me see, he said, thoughtfully. We don't want a cold place. The change would be too great, and we don't want a very hot place either. What do you think about Cornwall? The old man nodded. Stella smiled again. I don't have an opinion, she said. Would you like Cornwall, Frank? He looked from one to the other. What made you think of Cornwall? He asked Jasper suspiciously. Jasper laughed softly. It seemed like the perfect place for you. It is mild and clear, just what you need. Besides, I remember a little place near the sea, a sheltered village in a bay, Carlion they call it. That would be great for us. What do you think? Let's look at the map. He went and got a map and spread it out on the table, calling Stella. This is it, he said. Then in a low voice he whispered, There is a pretty, quiet little church there, Stella. Why shouldn't we get married there? She started, and her hand fell on the map. I am thinking of you, my dear, he said. For my part, I would like to be married here. No, not here, she said, thinking of standing before the altar in Wynwood Church and seeing the white walls of the hall as she said her marriage vows. Not here. I understand, he said. Then why not there? Your uncle could come down for that, I think. She did not speak, and with a smile of satisfaction he folded the map. It is all settled, he said. We go to Carlion. You will come down for a little while, I hope, sir. We will need you. The old man pushed the white hair off his forehead. He asked. What for? To give Stella away, replied Jasper. She has promised to marry me there. The old man looked at her. Why not here? He asked, naturally, but Stella shook her head. Very well, he said. It is a strange idea, but girls are full of strange ideas. Off you go then, and don't make more fuss than you need to. So Stella's fate was decided, and the fateful day, loomed darkly before her.